Absolutely agree.
This is Farid, so I fully agree.
Go ahead.
Agree with the previous comments, and of course you can simply improve your products by finding and eliminating interoperability issues, and you can sort of get the de facto proof for interoperability, which is valued by the potential customers, like operators, for example, if you are looking from the client perspective.
No, I absolutely agree, because let's face it, this is a multi-vendor industry. There is no such segment, whether it's telepresence or 3G or PSS or any area where there's going to be one and only one vendor. Customers want vendor choice, want to be able to deploy without worrying whether the products are going to work together. And interoperability testing is a big step in that area.
So one thing I'd like to underscore also here is the need to speak with a common voice in other SDOs. As Allyn mentioned, when you're going into the IETF particularly, and also several other SDOs, there's a much broader view of the applications, and it's very useful to have people with a common set of applications to be able to speak with one voice in those organizations.
Totally.
Yeah, so in this case, we are using the AG to influence the direction and development of the industry. So it's, I think, a different usage and another valuable, very valuable use, which is industry development, you could say, and industry growth.
Absolutely. And Stephen and Al, I think you brought up a great point. So the whole relationships with the SDO. So especially in the telepresence area, we're not just doing interoperability. We are much further upstream, if you will, defining the requirements, defining the use cases, and speaking to the SDO. Would some of the other AD chairs like to comment on their relationships with the SDOs, the Standards Development Organization? Albert, or
in the typical like 7 years or 8 years, and so we have been maintaining relationship like as mentioned, ITU-T, 3G, PP. So the value here is pretty great, as actually while we do the first-hand interoperability and then trying to clear the ambiguity of the standard, and then at the same time we have the ability to discuss and then find out the ambiguity and then propose clarification, feeding back to the SDO, so that like the standard become more mature and clear, and then so that actually help the public and help the industry to bring to the more mature standard. And obviously for the vendors, it's a more mature product by the end.
So if I understand it correctly, not just are we doing testing according to the standard, but when you put the standard in the real world, so to speak, you find out what the deficiencies are, what changes need to be made to the standard, and you actually result in eliminating those issues and having a better standard overall. So it's not just ensuring compliance to the standard, but also influencing the evolution of a standard once a standard comes up, because like everything else, standards need to be field tested and verified between various vendors. So that is so IMTC members are involved at the beginning when we're defining use cases and requirements. Once a standard comes out, you work to ensure interoperability according to the standard, and you work in the evolution of the standard itself based on real-world data. So it's not just people sitting on a piece of paper and making stuff up, but it's actual field experience, actual interoperability experience, and having been involved in some of the super ops sessions. That has been one of the biggest piece of feedback I've got from the engineers doing the interoperability. The ability to quickly come to and resolve issues. Normally, if you build stuff up in your lab, firstly, you need equipment from every possible vendor there is, and you need to be able to figure out, is it your problem or is it the equipment on the other side? And doing the interoperability in IMTC cuts that down to minutes or an hour or so at the most, compared to weeks that it would take normally. What would you have to say about that? So any of the AG chairs that focus on interoperability?
It's a great assistance. Because what happens is this: when you go into a room with all of these people, you're not only able of testing the product that you can buy on the market and test with them, you can test with the future products of those companies. So for example, within the MS activity group, the companies there can go and check their voice LTE product before the rest of the companies go into the market, and they can go, let's say, together and still synchronize on a single standard and be interoperable with that. So it's not only the fact that you can shorten the time frame of testing against whatever there is on the market, it's the ability to test with things that will go on the market in the near future as well.
Absolutely, and that's a great point, because otherwise you're way behind in the product cycle, and customers are looking at leading edge products. They want to be ensured of interoperability. The question that you get is, okay, this works for the products that were shipping 2 years ago. If I go buy the latest and greatest product from another vendor, is your product going to work with it? Absolutely, that's a great point. So, Farid and Ari, what are your thoughts on the value of the activity group, the relationship with the STO, interoperability testing?
Well, from my behalf, I have seen also the feature or item that companies have gained, let's say, more confident on bringing new features into the market via this IMTC PSS activities, because we have sort of been the frontier in testing some perhaps loosely defined standard and being the glue for different companies that they really have the courage to bring some certain feature to the market.
Absolutely, absolutely. So I think that's one of the key points there. So being able to interoperate, being able to test to defining test plans. I believe IMTC, especially PSS, has done a lot of work in building test tools and test scripts and automating this. So it's not just manual, let's put them together and see what works and what falls apart, but a whole series of automated test scripts using interoperability test tools. Albert, would you like to comment on some of that? So we've done a lot of work with that in that area.
And the network equipment vendor, like covering like a gateway and the value-added services like video mail. So yeah, so and with this, we all companies or all vendors actually can come together to do the interoperability. So making it more lesser problem, or it's actually more mature, like in the market, so that the product can just be used by the end user, yeah, without experiencing actually like any user problem.
Absolutely. So I'd also like to touch briefly on the initial phase. So if you notice, there are different phases in the software lifecycle, so to speak, where IMTC plays a role, a very heavy role or very significant role in interoperability testing, evolution of the standard. I'd like to go to Stephen and Allyn a little bit and talk a little bit more about the early phases, the use cases and requirements. Where do you think the IMTC adds, and the activity group, the telepresence activity group, adds value in defining the use cases and requirements compared to, for example, starting this off in the ITF or ITU? What's the value of that initial phase that IMTC activity group brings in?
So I would say that one of the benefits is that there's a lot more time spent early on by people trying to support the same or similar applications in the IMTC. And that allows us to understand what features we have to have that are at the core of our application, and then also some of the value-added and differentiating services and other ways of looking at telepresence that are interesting. And then when we bring that into the IETF, then it's an excellent core that the IETF can begin to work on. And by going down that particular path, we're far more likely to get the features that we all want and to build a standard that will serve us for years to come than if you just immediately start with every possible multi-streaming application.